Who did it? Well, within the Defense Department was a little Zionist cabal called the OSP, the Office of Special Plans. The Office of Special Plans, like WIG, acted as a shadow government. Their job was to cherry-pick or fabricate evidence to drag the United States into a war with Iraq. This was all outlined in Israeli policy papers from Benjamin Yahu in '96. The same authors, like Richard Pearl, who wrote the Israeli Clean Break Strategy, and Paul Wolfowitz, who is now the current head of the WTO, formed a think tank called Project for a New American Century, PNAC. These greedy little bastards regurgitated their policy plans for Israel to remove Saddam Hussein and attack Iraq. Sorry. Mush mush. I'm just going to leave that in there. I'm going to get back to PNAC and the OSP and how they lied us into war with Iraq when I go over 9/11, because those people are at the center of that. First, I want to finish up on profiteering. There's several other methods of profiteering I haven't mentioned yet. One of those is earmarked foreign aid. What the U.S. government does is it sends aid loans to a foreign government like Israel, who receives more foreign aid from the United States than any other nation by leaps and bounds. America sends Israel around $10 million a day, or $3 billion a year. We don't spend that much on any of our 50 states. That money is largely used to continue the ongoing conflict with Palestine, the West Bank, and Gaza, who Israel holds under an illegal, brutal military occupation. And I'm going to address that in much more detail later. The aid that the United States sends to Israel is earmarked so that 75% of the money has to be spent on U.S. arms. That means we are indirectly subsidizing our own arms industry through foreign aid. Another method of profiteering is through subsidies, and this is indirect and direct subsidies. Agribusiness in the United States accumulates $36 billion a year on average in government subsidies. That gives U.S. factory farms an enormous advantage over everyone else in agribusiness. And with things like NAFTA, which was so cleverly titled, has nothing to do with free trade, the U.S. can send its giant state-assisted monopolies into countries like Mexico and drive all the Mexican workers out of business involved in agribusiness. It is impossible for them to compete with the United States factory farms who have endless government backing. $36 billion, that's more than the defense budget of most countries. When this happens, the Mexicans migrate into the cities by the millions, which drives down the wages in the cities because it makes workers more replaceable. And what that does is it lowers the general expendable income, which crushes small businesses. So what happens is the wealth and assets of Mexico are being consolidated by U.S. corporates. Then they migrate into the United States and lower the wages there. And manufacturing jobs are shipped into Mexico, where the labor pool has been manipulated by the state-assisted monopolies, where goods can be produced cheaply, but they don't pass that savings on to consumers. They just pocket it. The Mexicans, workers, are harmed by this, and the American people are harmed by this. They are losing jobs, and the Mexicans are losing jobs. Even when the jobs are created by the manufacturing plants, they're losing far more jobs from agriculture. It's a disaster. But a clever little thing that Big Pharma has figured out is how they can be indirectly subsidized by the U.S. government by using farm subsidies. Within that $36 billion, huge factory farms have absolutely disgusting, inhumane conditions for farm animals, which create the need for a massive amount of antibiotics. The way they treat these animals, crammed together, sometimes crawling on top of each other. The waste from the pigs and nitrates alone are ruining estuaries, which is an environmental problem. That's a tangent, but 70% of all the antibiotics in the United States don't go to people. They go to farm animals. Who's paying for that? We are, with our taxes, because the farms buy it from big pharmaceutical companies. But the farms are subsidized by the government, and they also buy steroids and pesticides and a number of other drugs. So the U.S. government is indirectly subsidizing big pharma through the farm subsidies. And the industries it selects are the ones who have business ties to political employees. And you can look at the cabinet, and it's basically a corporate wish list, a who's who of who owns what in the U.S. And that's the reason it's called the Food and Drug Administration. They're in bed together. And a lot of things get categorized as crops and are subject to farm subsidies that aren't crops at all. The Forest Reserve in 1902, this is under Teddy, decided that trees were a crop for lumber industry, for wood, which you can definitely sell. It has nothing to do with the reason we need farm subsidies, and we do need them, but they're being vastly abused.